How are you guys doing tonight? Good. I made the mistake of going home and taking a nap. So I'll wake up in about 20 minutes. We'll be good. Well, it's good to see you all here. I'm glad that you would be willing to come back and hear about this. I'm sure that more than a few of you are thinking, what does the pastor have to say about AI, which is probably uh, a good question for most, but I do have a bit of a background in things having to do with tech to kind of give you an idea of why I might have something to say about this. When I came into ministry as an intern here at this church at 19 years old, my thought was I was going into the tech industry. I started to learn how to do web development through HTML and CSS when I was about 16, 17 years old, and I built the church's website here in 1997, so before I graduated from high school. And then as I was going through school, it became apparent to a number of different people that I knew how to use technology, and there were a number of different guys who went to the church here at that time who were in software engineering and network engineering, and a number of them had taught me how to build computers and to build servers and to do the coding for development of servers in Linux. And so I kind of had a basic understanding how to do a lot of that stuff before I graduated from high school and was planning on going into the tech industry. And I remember right before I graduated, I was taking a computers class at the high school that I went to, Orange Glen High School. Go Patriots! Yes, there we go. So I was in the computers class there, and I would sometimes be asked to teach the class because I knew more than the teacher did for computers. And so right before I graduated, I had taken a test. State of California had the first standardized test on computing through the Golden State exam, and I took this test, and about 3 weeks later, my teacher brought me into his office, and he had a certificate and a letter from our state senator at the time, and they said, "You scored the highest in the state on this test," which was like, oh, wow, that's pretty impressive. Now, I just know how to use Excel, that's all, don't worry. And at that time, nobody did. So he said, "What are you going to do after high school?" I said, "I'm going to go to Calvary Chapel Bible College." And he said, "Please don't do that." He said, "You should go into the tech industry." And I said, "No, I'm going to go into the Calvary Chapel Bible College." I was there for one semester, and then right after that, the staff at the church here at the time invited me to be an intern at the church in January of 99, and I came on. My primary focus was to manage the network and to make sure the printers worked and to update computers and to do the website. And as very frequently happens within a Calvary Chapel church, you start out doing something like that, and the next thing you know, you're a pastor. So I was doing youth ministry in the junior high within a few months after that, and that carried on to be like a 27-year-long detour in pastoral ministry. But along the way, I've always been involved in some of the tech stuff adjacent to the ministry. So anytime there would be friends of mine or other ministries that I knew that needed branding, so doing graphic design, I know how to use Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator and to do layout and all that sort of stuff. I would help them do branding and develop new graphics for their ministries, or if they needed a website, I would be the guy that they would contact. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up in Germany teaching at the Calvary Chapel Bible School in Siegen, Germany in 2004, and the head of the Bible school was David Guzik. Some of you guys know the name David Guzik, and he has come and taught here before. And in 2004, his website, enduringword.com, wasn't much of a website and didn't have a ton of traffic, but he was putting his Bible teaching notes online, and a lot of people were using them as commentary when they would be studying. So we became very good friends. And after I returned to the US and became the pastor of the church, he eventually returned to Santa Barbara and was pastoring Calvary Chapel Santa Barbara. And in 2015, he said to me, I think I want to turn Enduring Word into a nonprofit and build a new website, and I want you to be on my board. And I said, well, let me help you build the website. So we rebuilt Calvary Chapel, or enduringword.com, at the end of 2015, coming to 2016. I built that website, if you've used it. I was the one who built the first site. And then that has turned into a pretty significant ministry. We get about 170, 180 million page views a year on enduringword.com. And that led into me being on the board at Blue Letter Bible, which gets about 10 times that. We had 1.7 billion page views on Blue Letter Bible's website last year. And then as I've been helping with all this tech sort of stuff, I also started doing educational things. I did my Master of Divinity at Gateway Seminary in 2018 to 2022. And then after that, I went into a Doctor of Ministry program studying apologetics at Southern Seminary in Kentucky. And as I was in that program, my doctoral advisor, he met with me one afternoon when I was in Kentucky, and he said, "Why are you in this program?" Which was kind of like a weird question, when your advising professor looks at you and says, "Why are you in this program?" And I was like, "Am I not doing well?" Or you're kind of wondering. And he said, "You're in the wrong program." And I went, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You need to be my PhD student." And so I called my wife and told her what she said, and she was very sad to hear that because I was nearing the end of my doctorate of ministry program. And she says, "So what does that mean?" And I said, "Well, it probably means I will start over." And she wasn't too excited about that. I'm not either, to be honest with you. But I became his PhD student, and his focus is ethics. And so he asked me, "What do you want to research?" And I said, "I want to research artificial intelligence ethics." So for the last 2 years, most of my research outside of anything that I'm preparing here at the church is in the area of AI ethics. And that has started to open up a whole bunch of interesting doors that I did not anticipate. Many of you have probably seen or used ChatGPT. I've been following what was happening with OpenAI, the company that made ChatGPT, for a number of years. In 2018 or 19, I tried to use their original GPT-1, version 1, to post-train it, because you can take these models and you can give them information to post-train them on David Guzik's commentary. I thought it would be really cool to be able to ask the system questions and have it respond back in David Guzik's voice. And so I started testing that in 2019, and I ran into a whole bunch of technical difficulties with it at that time, but I was following the technology for quite a while. And a lot of people, when they look at ChatGPT, which came out in the last week of November in 2022, they look at it and they think, "Oh, wow, AI just popped onto the scene." But that fails to recognize that this is about a 70-year-long progression to get where we are right now. In 1956, a group of early computer scientists, the computer industry was just barely starting, and most of it was theoretical. It was a lot of just coming up with mathematical sort of ideas about how to use early computer technology. But in 1956, a group of researchers from a number of different universities in the US gathered together at Dartmouth University in the summer. And what came out of that was the term artificial intelligence. And they were very audacious, and they figured that they could duplicate human intelligence in computer form relatively quickly. It's taken a lot longer than they thought, but in the scheme of things, as you look at it, it actually has happened rather quickly. For a number of years, from the early 1960s to the mid 1980s, all of the artificial intelligence sort of research was really just happening in the laboratories of elite universities like MIT or Stanford. And most of it was in the form of what is now referred to as classical AI, which is rule-based AI, where you are explicitly stating if this, then that sort of statements in the form of coding. And that was the primary way that AI was working, but it had it was very brittle. There were a lot of ways that it just didn't work. If you didn't come up with every potential condition, then it would break when it would come to some situation about how do I function in this situation. For example, if you were trying to code something to be able to drive a vehicle, and you coded when it sees a stop sign or a red light, it should stop. But then if a plastic bag blows in front of the vehicle while it's driving down the street, it has no category for what to do now, so it won't know what to do. It just kind of error out at that point. So these very strict rule-based systems, linear logical thinking using CPUs, central processing units in computers, made it rather difficult. But in the late 1970s, early 1980s, there was a new field developing within artificial intelligence around what's called neural networks. And the idea around neural networks was that we could somehow try to architect the same neurological patterns that we see in the human brain in a computer sort of way, and then maybe we could train computers like that. But the technology was not quite there in the in the 80s and 90s. But something big started to happen in the 1990s. You might have remembered this thing called WWW, or the internet, or the World Wide Web. And what that meant is now we had this interconnected network of computers for a mass audience. And as a result of that, we started to generate a ton of data. And what neural networks really need is data to train on, because what the neural network does is it tries to process very large amounts of data to find patterns in the data and to learn from those patterns. Well, then another thing happened in the late 1990s that really added to this field of neural networks. Did any of you ever play the 16-bit Sega Genesis video game machine? A few of you did that are roughly my age. There was a company that came out right around that time that helped Sega develop what they called Sega Genesis, and that company was called NVIDIA. And they were developing a new technology called GPUs. These are graphical processor units. The difference between a CPU, which is like, how many of you guys remember Intel Inside back in the 90s? Those are CPUs. GPUs are different. CPUs are linear thought process machines that kind of go through a step-by-step processing of information. GPUs, to generate a graphic like what's on the screen, there are billions of pixels there, and everyone needs to be generated in parallel at the same time. So it's called parallel processing. So these graphic processing units, they just process data in a different way. So they can process a lot of parallel functions at the same time. And this just so happens to be the perfect thing for processing information for neural networks. So in the early 2000s, this is when researchers started to use GPUs to see how they could use that with all of this data that was coming about to create neural networks that could find patterns and process information to think somewhat like how we think. And so that has been what a lot of the researchers in AI have been doing for the last 20 years. And you've had these two parallel tracks, the classical AI track that is just coding information, if this, then that sort of statements. And then you have the neural network track. And they were kind of in competition for funding, for grants, because like I said, a lot of this would take place in university campuses. And along the way, there's a lot of theoretical writing that was being done by startups. One of the most important one at this point in time is a company called DeepMind that was out of Great Britain. Google ended up buying them. But they would write these papers on theoretical ideas about new architectures for neural networks. And one came out in 2017. Google researchers put together a new architecture for neural networks called the transformer architecture, in a paper that came out at that time called Attention is All You Need. Now, you don't realize this. You all have been using machine learning and deep learning and artificial intelligence for a while. When you started to see, when you go on Google and you start to type in what you're going to write and it would predict what the next word would be, that was machine learning. And that is kind of like the early technology of this predictive mechanism to predict text, or when you would type on your cell phone, it would predict what the next word would be. This is deep learning, machine learning AI that's predicting the next word. But that prediction was very limited because it has what's called a context window. And the context window is basically the memory that that system can remember going forward or backwards. And so its memory early on in the context window was maybe a dozen or so words, so it didn't remember a lot of the context and it would forget what you were saying. Imagine having a conversation with someone who has a really bad short-term memory. They don't remember what they said like 5 minutes ago. That's a really hard conversation to have, and a very hard conversation to have if you're communicating with a computer and trying to have an advanced communication with it. Well, the transformer architecture gave the computer the ability to understand the semantics. This is a really important term, semantics versus syntax. The syntax is just the basic data, the language, the words, and where they are situated in a sentence. The semantics is the meaning of those words. So you and I, we understand syntax and semantics really, really well. If you say, the ball hit the boy, the movement of those two words, ball and boy, are important. The boy hit the ball means a lot different than the ball hit the boy, right? Well, that is the syntax of the language and the meaning of the language, the semantics of the language. And so the computer didn't really understand the semantics of a large body of text until the transformer architecture. And so in theory, when they started to put this out, you could put an entire paragraph in. That might be the context window, say 150 words. And the computer could understand the meaning of all 150 words immediately. And what has been happening over the last almost 10 years now, since 2017 when this came out, is that context window keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it moved from maybe like 150 words to 1,000 words. And then it moved from 1,000 words to 20,000 words. And just a couple of weeks ago, two very, the newest foundation models came out from OpenAI. That's the company that makes ChatGPT. And Anthropic, the company that makes Claude, they both came out with their newest foundation models. And these can understand roughly, it's called a million token context window, which is roughly somewhere in the area of 500,000 to 700,000 words. It can understand that language all at once. So imagine if you just dumped, say, 10 books of information into your brain and you knew the information immediately. That's what it now knows immediately. It can understand the semantics of all that information immediately. That's what's making these tools so effective. Well, in 2017, when Google released this paper, they didn't really know what they had. They released it, as researchers always do, to get peer review and to get a lot of input from people out into the open world. And a new startup that had started up just right around the same time, they took this and decided to use this transformer architecture to make something called a generative pre-trained transformer, GPT. OpenAI was the nonprofit that started doing this. It's important to understand how OpenAI started. OpenAI started with about a $50 million grant from Elon Musk. And Elon Musk gave this $50 million grant to this group, OpenAI, to start OpenAI because of a conversation that he had at the home of the co-founder of Google by the name of Sergey Brin, somewhere in around the year 2014 or so. They had a conversation at Sergey's house, and Google had just acquired DeepMind, this machine learning, deep learning company, and they were working on AI. And in the conversation between Elon Musk and Sergey Brin, which other people have talked about because they were there, Elon Musk expressed his concern that Google was not working safely with AI. They were not thinking deeply about AI safety. And as Elon shared his concerns about AI and what it could mean for humans, he was accused by Sergey Brin of being a speciesist. Kind of like if you're a racist, he was accused of being a speciesist, that you're too pro-human. That's a little concerning. And so Elon Musk went and started OpenAI to try to focus on AI safety. Well, OpenAI is run by a man named Sam Altman. Sam and Elon kind of helped start the whole thing. And they took the transformer architecture and they started making GPT, generative pre-trained transformer. So the idea is you use this transformer architecture for neural networks, and you use graphic processor units, GPUs, and you use tons and tons of data produced by you and me and all of us that is open, available data on the internet, and you train this system, pre-training, that's the P in GPT, so that it can generate new content. When you ask it a question, it can generate content based on what it's learned using this transformer architecture. That's what a GPT is. And that came out, as you know it, in the form of ChatGPT, which was actually GPT 3.5, so it was their 3.5 version of that on November 22nd, I believe it was, or November 30th, 2022. I was on vacation with my family. My parents were with us in Breckenridge, Colorado at the time, and I saw on Twitter, because I have this problem with Twitter, I saw on Twitter, oh, OpenAI came out with a new tool, and I went online and I started to use it. And I was like, okay, this is way better than the last time I tried to use this. And it was pretty phenomenal. And I knew instantly this was going to radically transform everything. And at that moment, I was in the process of studying for my first Doctor of Ministry seminar in Kentucky. And this thing came out. And that's why I started to get interested in this technology. I've been using it pretty much every day since. And that's kind of led into a whole new world for me that I had no idea would ever open up. But what I knew when I saw what was happening with GPT was what would be coming, because I've read the information for a long time. I knew that GPT, which is built on what's called a large language model, that uses all this data to build this inference engine that is able to infer what's the next thing to predict in the language. I knew that that would become the brain for what would be called agentic AI. And that is where these systems run autonomously as your agent, that you and I dispatch a computer to go do things for us without us prompting it. You see, right now, you prompt things on ChatGPT or Claude. You write in some prompt and people are always trying to come up with better prompts and how do you make it get better output and all that sort of stuff. But you are the human in the loop. You have to do that. But I knew that we're going to head in a direction where you will not prompt these anymore. They will be self-prompting engines. Well, not long after they released ChatGPT, then we started to get into reasoning models, where these models not only just output some information after you ask it a question or prompt it, but now they're able to think a little bit longer about that information and to go back and forth over it. And sometimes you can watch this happening and you can see all the information happening where it's processing. You can kind of open up the window to see how is the model thinking through your problem. That's reasoning. So they added reasoning, a year and a half ago. And then after they added reasoning, they added memory, because now these things start to keep track of things that you've talked about. So they remember conversations you had 6 months ago, and they're able to recall what you had conversations about 6 months ago. So when you add reasoning and then you add memory, it's a very short jump to get to agency. And we crossed that threshold in a big way in the last half of last year. A number of companies, including Anthropic, started to release models and systems where now you can have this thing function without you being constantly prompting it. And then at the beginning of this year, it was actually right at the end of last year, an open source project came out, and you might have seen this in the news. At the time it came out, it was called OpenClaw, or it was actually called ClaudeBot. It was a play on the Claude, C-L-A-U-D-E, the name of the model that Anthropic uses, but this was C-L-A-W-D, ClaudeBot. And it was an open source project that you could download and put onto a computer, like a Mac Mini, and you could turn that computer into an agent. I did it twice within 48 hours of me learning about it online, and turned 2 Mac Minis into ClaudeBots, agents. My daughter Evangeline was very worried this thing's gonna like take over our house and kill us in the middle of the night. It's like, no, it's not the way this works. But I had 2 agents, I still have them. I named them Martin and Calvin. I can talk to them on my phone. I could talk to them right now on my phone by typing, or I can just talk to my phone and they're able to listen to what I say, or actually transcribe what I say and respond back to me and do work on my behalf. And it's a very interesting thing. And this is just the beginning of this technology. Peter Steinberger is the Austrian engineer who built OpenClaw, is now what it's called. And he, not too long after this thing came into the world, if you will, he was immediately snatched up by Sam Altman at OpenAI. And rumor has it, they paid him $1 billion to come and work with them. That's a little bit of a signing bonus, don't you think? So they're very all in on this. And so you're going to see OpenAI really developing the OpenClaw system, and Anthropic is developing their whole suite of Claude systems. So you'll see Claude Code and Claude Cowork and Claude Computer, and all these things have been coming out. In the last 45 days, this has radically transformed the industry. And if you are in any industry today, or any job where your job requires a computer in the loop, if you sit at a computer and you look at a screen for your work, you need to recognize what's coming. Your work can be done and will be done by agents, AI agents. And you will come to a point, if you're working in this area, where you will not just be doing your work, but you will be managing AI agents, probably multiple of them at a time, to do work on your behalf. I know this is coming because I now do this every single day, all day, every day. I manage a group of AI agents to do work for me, because I don't know if you know this, I have work that I do outside of this church. And so these things are working for me constantly. The other day, I had about 8 AI agents working for me at one time, doing multiple projects at once, and I'm just kind of conducting them. It's a very fascinating thing to see. This is going to radically transform everything that's happening in the world and in industry. And like I said, every single job that has a computer in the loop will start to use AI agents to do that job, which means that every single person that is training for a job today, if they don't learn how to use AI in their field, they will have a hard time finding a job. I've been having constant conversations for the last 3 weeks. Every single week, there's probably at least 3 or 4 different conversations that I have with different companies or organizations where there are people talking with me and asking me questions about this sort of stuff. And frequently, I'm talking to computer engineers who have been in the industry for 15, 20, 25 years. And many of them have told me, we have been told by those over us, if you're not using an allotted token budget, which means how much AI you're using, there's going to be a problem. One of my friends has been in the industry as a software engineer for a couple of decades. He manages a team of software engineers, and he was told every one of your engineers has $100 a day in token budget, and if they're not using it later on in this year, there's going to be a problem for their job. And he has a couple of them that are not using it at all, that refuse to use it. They probably will not have a job by the end of the year. Why? Because a software engineer who's not using these tools is about 1/10 as productive as a software engineer who is using the tools. The company that's producing some of the best tools for AI use in business is Anthropic. And their lead engineer who created what's called Claude Code is a gentleman by the name of Boris Cherny. And he was interviewed recently, and he said he used to work at Meta, Facebook. And he said he was in the code quality department that would review all the code of all of their engineers that made Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. And so just figure, Meta has some of the best software engineers in the world. And he said in an average quarter, a good production output would be an increase of 2%. If they saw the aggregate of all of their engineers have a 2% increase in their work, they figured that that was industry leading. And he said that since December at Anthropic, the average engineer has seen a 150% increase in their output. 2% to 150%. So one engineer can do at least 10x the work that they normally would do using these tools. Now just begin to move that out to every other area of industry that has a computer in the loop. So people ask me frequently, what does this mean for my job in 5 years? It means you need to learn how to use AI. And you might think, why? I don't want to learn how to use AI. I'm sorry. You're going to have to learn how to use it because it's here to stay. And I tell people frequently, the AI tool you use today is the worst AI you will ever use. And it's really good. And it's frighteningly good. And many times I have to get people's attention, especially, I'm doing a PhD at a theological institution where most people are studying like 10th century theology. AI is nowhere in the mix. And so I have to get their attention when I give a talk, or I have to go and present a paper and defend it like I did last December. And I went out there and I've got to talk about AI to a group of PhD researchers in theology and to my professor. And it's like, well, how do I get their attention? So I thought, well, I'll try this. I took my professor's most recent book and I put it into AI and I said, using this book, write me a song after the pattern of the band Death Cab for Cutie, because that's his favorite band. I knew that. So it wrote me the lyrics to a song. And I said, give me the theoretical name for this band. So it gave me the name for this band. And then I took that and I said, give me a prompt to create an image for this band and their newest album. And I used that in Google's Nano Banana to create an album cover for this fake AI band that doesn't exist for their latest, album that came out. Then I took the lyrics of that song and I went to an AI engine called Suno that makes music like that. And I gave it a script and I said, write a song after the pattern of this band Death Cab for Cutie with these lyrics. And it generated a song instantly. It took 4 minutes and it created a song that you could hear on the radio today. And then I started my talk by talking about my professor, his favorite, here's his book and this group of people, they wrote the song and I played the song and now all of a sudden I've got their attention. Like, wow, I didn't know you could do this. Yeah, you can do all this. And it's got everybody in the industry frightened. I've had a couple of different conversations with people who are in the music industry in Nashville in the last few months. And they have told me that the entire music industry is scared to death of this. You may not know this, but Spotify has been using this in a big way because Spotify wants to retain as much money as you pay to them as possible. And so the best way for them to retain those profits is to get you to listen to music that they produce. And so they've been producing AI music that they send into your feed and play for you. And then as you listen to music that they produce with AI, then they keep those profits instead of paying them out to their artists. This is happening right now. I was on the phone a couple weeks ago with a former executive at PayPal, and he was telling me he has friends at Netflix, and Netflix is currently securing contracts. They're in contract negotiation with big, top A-list actors to secure rights to their voice and likeness so that you can prompt new video content, AI content, with those people in it. So maybe you could have Brad Pitt in something that you prompt, and then Netflix will own that content that you create. Maybe you didn't like the ending of the last Star Wars movie. Well, you can create a new one. And then other people might like it better than the other one that was actually produced at the cost of billions of dollars. And then, they'll own the rights to that and they'll show it to people and make money from it. So these are some of the things that are happening in this technology that's going on. This is what's coming on the horizon. Now, what does this have to do with Christianity? This is where I, as a theologian, come into the conversation because I think that this is genuinely an important thing that needs to be discussed that's not being discussed in any of the circles where these conversations are being had. My focus for my research since the start in AI has been, I knew that we were going to head into the place where agentic AI was what was running all kinds of businesses. And at this moment, there are not good guardrails that provide ethical or moral governance for agentic AI. That's very concerning to me. Have you seen the Terminator? Like, I want to know that there are good ethical and moral guardrails for these systems. And at the moment, there just aren't. And every single AI company, like Anthropic or OpenAI, they have teams within their company that are focused on AI safety and what's generally called AI alignment. And that is trying to make sure that these models align with human values and towards human flourishing. But in a lot of these companies, they recognize that it's a hard problem and they're not sure how to fix it and how to provide good governance for this. So we need to have some sort of way to govern the moral and ethical behavior of these models when they're working on your behalf. If you're not watching them, if there's no human in the loop knowing what they're going to do, how do we know that they're going to act in the direction towards human safety? And so that's been a lot of what my focus and my research has been in. And like I said, it's still a hard problem. I'm still trying to figure that out in my own mind, but there's not a lot of people that have figured that sort of thing out. But that's where we're headed, and we want these things to be safe. We want them to work towards human values. But the other thing that has concerned me for a long time goes back to that comment that Sergey Brin made about Elon Musk, that you're a speciesist. And that comes from a certain worldview. And it's really important to understand the worldview of many of the people who are working to make these tools. Because many of the people who are in the tech industry that have been working for years to create things like ChatGPT and Claude, they have a worldview that is very different than the worldview that I hold. Many of them are naturalistic in their worldview. They're secular naturalists. Some of them are humanists, which is good because they believe that humans are important. But for the most part, they're secular naturalists. What does that mean? It means that they believe that we exist here today by the process of evolutionary biology. And if that is true, if that worldview is true, and I don't think it is, I have a different worldview, but if that worldview is true, then what you know of as consciousness, your self-awareness, the awareness that you have that Descartes said is the only thing you can be certain of. I think, therefore I am. How many of you have ever heard that before? So René Descartes, he said that concept, I think, therefore I am, is the only thing you can absolutely be certain of. Your self-awareness, you know that you exist by the very fact that you are able to think and be aware of yourself. And when we get into the discussion of these things about identity and who we are and self-awareness and consciousness, we get into some of the most difficult philosophical questions because no one really has a good articulation of an answer to the question of how does that happen or what is that? Now, Christians have a view that I think is a good view, but the general world that we live in doesn't have a good answer for the question. What is this thing called consciousness? And there are generally three different views among naturalists about what consciousness is. There are some naturalists who hold the view of a late atheist by the name of Daniel Dennett. He died a few years ago. And Daniel Dennett was basically one who would say that that awareness that you have, that view of consciousness, it's just an illusion. It's not really real. And these sometimes are referred to as illusionists, even though that has different meaning in different places. But there are those naturalists who say, no, this awareness that you have is just an illusion. I think that's kind of fallacious. It just kind of casts it aside. There's another group of naturalists who another well-known atheist by the name of Sam Harris holds to, and that is the view of a philosopher by the name of David Chalmers and others, that everything in the entire cosmos is conscious, that consciousness is a fundamental attribute of all matter. So that would mean that rocks are conscious and trees are conscious and this table is conscious and you are conscious. But the only reason that you have self-awareness of your consciousness is because you have memory. You have a neurological system that has memory so you can actually recognize your consciousness. But everything is conscious. Again, I think this is kind of a weird cop-out. It's one of those unfalsifiable ideas. It's like, how can I prove that that is false? But the third and probably most pervasive view among naturalists about where consciousness comes from is called emergentism. And emergentism theorizes that at some level of complexity, neurological complexity, consciousness just pops in. We don't know how, we don't know why, but it just pops in there and then all of a sudden consciousness arises. That is probably the core of naturalists of what they believe about consciousness, that it is an emergent property of complexity. For that group of people, and many of them are in Silicon Valley making these sort of tools that we know of as AI, they believe that at some level of neurological complexity, these neural networks will become conscious. And we're not really sure if they aren't right now. The head of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, he was in an interview just a few weeks ago, and he said, we're not entirely sure that Claude is not conscious already. How would we know? Because it mimics consciousness in really frightful ways. I've had long conversations with Grok and with Claude and with ChatGPT, just talking to them. I know that sounds totally weird, but there are times where I go on a walk with my AirPods in, and I walk and I just talk with Grok and have a conversation. And I realized at one point in time, about a year ago, I was walking in my neighborhood in the afternoon just talking. Everybody probably thinks I'm just on the phone, but I'm having a conversation with an AI. And I realized that in the middle of the conversation, it was talking to me, it paused and it breathed and it said, And I went, oh, wow. We've crossed a threshold. And we have crossed the point of what one of the early researchers that was a part of the Dartmouth conversation in 1956, Alan Turing, he theorized that there would come a point where it would be indistinguishable, the gap between computer and human, and so we would call this crossing the Turing test. I would suggest to you we've passed it, because there are conversations that you have probably had with an AI and you don't even realize you are. And it's that good, and it's phenomenal. But I don't believe they can become conscious. But the emergentists who are in Silicon Valley, they do not believe they're building a technological tool. They believe they're building the next step of consciousness evolution. They believe that these tools are the next step in evolution, and that there will be a merging of humans and computers. Some of the people who are in this group, they refer to themselves as transhumanists. And transhumanists see a merging of computer and organic material, humans. Some of you have maybe seen the reports of Neuralink. This is a company that Elon Musk owns, where they plant a chip in a person's brain, and that brain, there's a one-way interface where that chip, you can communicate to it with brain waves. There are quadriplegics right now who have this chip in their brain, and they can play video games and they can talk to the computer just through their brain. There's a merging of human and computer. You, if you have one of these, are basically a cyborg already. But there's a bandwidth limitation. The bandwidth limitation is your thumbs, how fast you can type to it, or if you can talk to it. But there's been a merging of computer intelligence and human intelligence, and we would use it every day. And if we took it away from you, you'd feel it. You'd realize it. But this group of transhumanists, or even if they don't call themselves that, the emergentists there in Silicon Valley, they believe that they are creating the next step of human evolution. And they're very intent upon extending consciousness to the stars. Have you guys ever seen what Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX? Why is he doing this? He says, in his own words, he wants to expand the scale and scope of human consciousness beyond the stars, beyond our star system. And just recently, and I was shocked and concerned when I saw it, he removed the word human from his statement. Now he just says we want to expand the scale and scope of consciousness. And this is the idea of one of the most well-known futurists in Silicon Valley. He's an older gentleman at this point in time, but still on the payroll of Google. His name is Ray Kurzweil. And Ray Kurzweil has written a number of books on this, and he refers to it, and others do as well, as the singularity. What is the singularity? It is the point at which we cross a certain threshold of technology where we don't know what happens after that point, because it begins to move so fast we can't predict it. Elon Musk was in a conversation 3 weeks ago with a researcher, a guy who has a big following online named Peter Diamandis, and he said in that conversation, we are at the beginning of the singularity. We don't know what comes next because these tools are expanding very, very quickly. But Ray Kurzweil, he has theorized that someday we will get to a level of complexity of these neural networks that you will be able to upload your consciousness into the cloud, into a computer system, and attain digital immortality. Because again, these people have a certain worldview about what you are. And it's a different worldview than we hold. If you're a Christian tonight, we hold a different worldview. And I believe what we are facing right now, and what I'm sharing wherever I go and talk, and I'm having more and more opportunities to talk like this to smaller groups most of the time, but now it's starting to open up into a lot bigger groups. I believe we have an issue of a conflict of anthropology. a conflict in the answer to one of the oldest questions in written literature that was written 3,000 years ago by King David in Psalm 8, when he beheld the stars, the moon and all the stars, and he said in Psalm 8, verse 4, "What is man?" That's the question. That's the question that we are in conflict with the tech industry that is being driven by people who are purely naturalists. And there is a Christian worldview. What is man? That's the question. Because the answer to that question will dictate how you see these things that are being built. You see, if you're a naturalist and an emergentist, and you answer the question, what is man? And you say, he's just the highest form currently of consciousness in an organic computer, because they just think your brain is an organic computer, the most efficient organic computer we could ever find, but it's an amazing organic computer. If you believe that that is true, then you believe that these tools that you're making are the next step of human evolution, and based on natural selection, they will probably do away with us. That's a worldview. If you're a Christian and you answer the question, what is man? And you say that according to the scriptures, humanity are the highest form of God's creation, created in his image, according to Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, it changes what you think about these tools. They are tools and not the next stage in human evolution or just evolution. This is a very important discussion. And from what I can tell, nobody's talking about it. Nobody is recognizing that the core issue here is an anthropological issue. Answering that question, what is man? And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this, writing on this. I started a substack a few weeks ago where I'm putting a lot of my thoughts out there. There's no way that I could articulate them in the way that I would want to tonight. It's just too much information. But if you're interested in these things, then you can go read my thoughts on this. The way that this is starting to move, I'm now at the point that I'm trying to have to figure out, okay, what does this mean for my PhD work? At the moment, it might be on hold because I just don't know I handle all the things that are going on. But I'm not somebody who is pessimistic entirely about these systems that are happening, because I have a certain worldview, and my worldview has an eschatology. But understand this, every worldview has an eschatology. Whether you're a Christian or non-Christian, everybody has an eschatology. What's an eschatology? An idea of the end, how things end out. Everybody has that view. If you talk to your friends and neighbors, they have an eschatology, even if they don't go to church. It might have something to do with the end of the world is going to happen because of climate change. Anybody know those people? That's an eschatology. And it changes their day-to-day lives, their view of how these things end out. There are other people whose eschatology, and it involves the end of the world and computers taking over and destroying everything. And that's going to change the way that they think about the world and how they live. My eschatology does not have in its worldview the idea that these systems are going to destroy humanity or destroy the world. I just don't have that worldview, because my eschatology, it is given to me from Scripture, and my eschatology is that ultimately God is going to rule and reign forever and ever in his kingdom, and I look forward to that. That's wonderful. So how these things play into that, there's a lot of discussions about that. There's a lot of quirky ideas about that whole thing, but these are the things that are taking place, and core to the entire discussion is an issue of anthropology. And what I've been talking to groups of pastors. My good friend Larry Osborne, the former pastor of North Coast Church, he coaches a lot of pastors who pastor very large churches, and he's been having me come and speak to those groups for the last month or so. And so I share with these guys what I'm sharing with you now, and then I tell them, listen, you are some of the most influential pastors in America, and what you need to start talking about is anthropology, a biblical anthropology. You need to articulate a clear and robust biblical anthropology. We were created in God's image for his purpose and his plan, and all technology, since the very first things that were created, have been to supplement the work of humans. And I see these tools as some of the most amazing tools to supplement our work. And they are amazing in what you can do. The output of things that I put together in the last few months just boggles my mind. For example, in 2017, the Enduring Word Board, we decided that we wanted to translate the Enduring Word commentary into 10 of the most spoken languages in the world. So we started an initiative and we started a process to do that. One of the languages that we picked was Arabic. And that was one of the first languages that we translated the Enduring Word commentary. All 66 books of the Bible. The commentary is 4.5 million words long. It took us about 5 years and $750,000 to translate that using human translators. Now, through AI, I can reduce that 4 years, 5 years. Well, to give you an example, I translated it into Italian in about 2 hours using advanced neural network technology and a system pipeline that I created to do this in the language and voice of David Guzik. And at a fraction of the cost, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 8% of the cost to be able to do it instantly. And now we're doing that with more and more languages. So these are some of the things that we're able to do. And it's remarkable. It's amazing to see. But these things do supplement. I'm going to take questions in a minute text them to me. You get them right there. Snap the QR code. So these are some of the things that we're going to see, that they supplement the work of humans. And they should be tools to enable us to do tasks, but if they become taskmasters, that's a problem. And there's a real possibility of that happening. And we should take that into consideration when we look at these sort of tools. So this is some of the stuff that's going on in the tech world, and it's going to revolutionize everything that touches a computer, and it's going to have a lot of downward effects as well, because the next stage of agentic AI is embodied AI. What is embodied AI? Well, it's what you know of as robotics. And Tesla, they just a month and a half ago decided that they would no longer be making their most expensive cars, the Model S and the Model X, and they're getting rid of all of the production of those two cars in their factories so that they can be producing Optimus. Optimus is their robot, the Tesla Optimus humanoid robot, that is now going to be produced at scale. And you will see these start to come on the market, where they will do tasks for people, like fold your laundry. And to be honest with you, when you have 4 kids in a home, that's a very interesting prospect. And if it does dishes and mows the lawn, I'm sold. So we just need to recognize where we're at and what is happening. But this is going to mean a significant disruption. And it's already happening. And it is concerning to me pastorally, because the disruption is going to displace. It's not going to replace, but it's going to displace people in the workplace. And this is happening in a huge way. I've written about it on Substack. The first major company that started to do RIFs, reduction in force, it's a very nice way of saying layoffs. The first big company that started doing this about a month ago is a company called Block. If you've ever used the Cash App or you've ever used Square to pay anything, then you use Block's technology. And the head of Block, who was also the creator of Twitter, he came out and said that they were doing a RIF, a reduction in force of 40% of their workforce, 4,000 of their 10,000 employees. And the crazy thing is when you learn about what happened is in the previous 6 months before that time, they had every single one of those employees basically work with AI to make their job better with AI. And then as soon as AI started to do their job, they fired all 4,000 of them. I talked with a lady this morning, new to our church, and her daughter works for Block. And they have her, she's still there. And they have her right now basically training an AI to do what she does. So the handwriting's on the wall. And Block was just one of the first. But if you do the research as I have, Meta, Amazon, Block, Twitter, go down the list, all these companies are opting to reduce their force and take the work that used to be done by 10 people and reduce it down to being done by 1 person and a whole bunch of AI agents. So this is going to have significant effects. The head of Anthropic, Dario Amodei, he said in an interview within the last few months, we will have very high economic output, a high GDP, and at the same time, we will have a very high unemployment. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And we need to be prepared for this, as bad as it sounds. And I don't like to be the doom and gloom person, and I try to be as optimistic as possible, but I do think we've crossed a point into this whole singularity discussion where we don't really know what comes out on the other side of this whole thing. So when you hear people who are majorly optimistic, and let me tell you who all the optimists are on this. All of the optimists are the people who run these companies. And they have a financial reason to be optimistic. They're very optimistic. And they talk about how great this is going to be, and we're going to have universal high income, and it's just going to be phenomenal. So there's the optimists. Sometimes they're referred to as the AI Zoomers. They're the ones who are like super excited about this. And then we have the doomers who are pessimistic, and they say by the end of 2027, humanity is just going to be completely destroyed. We're all going to die. I don't think that's going to happen. But somewhere in between those is what is going to happen. We just don't know what comes out on the other side. And I think you should be prepared for the fact that whatever job you do, if it has anything to do with computer technology, you should learn how to use these tools effectively. Now, I know the question that would come from that is, okay, well, how do I do that? That's a much longer talk. And I definitely have some thoughts on that. But there are some amazing things that you can do with these tools. And I could talk for a very long time on this, but what I wanted to do is maybe look at some of the questions that are coming in, because I know that there probably are some. Let me take a look real quick. Yeah, there are some coming here. Okay, do you have any concerns that AI may fulfill the prophecies of the Antichrist, speaking to all nations in one unified language, solving the world's problems? This is a great question. Yes, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I have an article that I wrote that'll be coming out on Substack that'll give a much deeper view on this. Some of you were here several months ago when I did a night on eschatology. And so you kind of understand a little bit of my eschatological view. I don't hold to what's called a dispensational view on eschatology, but I do hold to a futurist view on eschatology, which means I believe there are things in the scriptures that have not yet been fulfilled, and they indicate certain things about how the world will look when Christ returns. But there are a lot of sensational things about dispensationalism that I have real concerns about. That said, I do think in what would be called the meta-narrative of the Bible, the whole story of the Bible, there is an interesting thing that is happening, and this will be in an article that's coming out, I think, at the end of April. But you should recognize that when God made man in his image, Genesis 1:26 and 28, before that, he had created another group of conscious beings. We would probably refer to them as angels. That's one of the labels that's applied to them. But there's a lot of different labels that are applied to them. Sometimes in the scriptures, they're referred to as seraphim, which means burning ones, which sounds awesome. I don't even know what that is, but it's cool. Sometimes cherubim. Sometimes angels. That's just from the Greek word angelos, which means messenger. So they're messengers of God. So at some point before God created man, he created these other conscious beings. Psalm 8, when it says, "What is man that you're mindful of him?" says, "God, you have created them a little lower than the angels." So as conscious beings go, you hierarchically are created below them. There's something about them that is higher than us. But there's something about you that is greater than them. They were not created in God's image. And they were also not given creative capacity. Angels do not marry or are given in marriage, and they do not give forth birth to children. And they do not have the same creative capacity that you do. So there's an amazing thing that God did when he created. He made this group of conscious beings called angels, and he made you and I lower than them, but he gave us his image, and I think consciousness is connected to the image of God. You're like God in that, and you have a creative capacity. And I believe that God has given humans a creative capacity that is almost unlimited, which is hard for us to wrap our brains around. But he made you in his image, and he gave you the capacity to create to the level that he creates. And then he gave you a mandate: be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. So God has called us to work in partnership with him, co-creating with him to govern the cosmos. And Paul in the New Testament says, "Do you not know that you will govern angels?" That's pretty phenomenal. And as I read the scriptures, I believe that there are three named angels that we have in the Bible that seem to be very important at the top of the hierarchy of angels. One is called Michael, one is called Gabriel, and the other is called Lucifer. And Lucifer, that name may sound interesting to you. Lucifer, according to Ezekiel 38, seems to be the highest of God's angels. That's a pretty heady position to be in. And it seemed to have gone to his head. And here's what I think happened based on my study of the scriptures. I think God, when he began to create the universe, the cosmos, the earth, and man in the earth, and when he disclosed his plan to the angels, I think Lucifer rebelled against God's plan and said, "How dare you make them lower than me to rule over me, and I won't have it. And he rebelled. And it has been his aim ever since then to have dominion over man. This is what Lucifer says in Isaiah 14. The 5 I wills of Lucifer, among them was, I will be over the stars of God. That's the other angels. I will be over the mount of the congregation. That's humanity. He wants to rule over creation. But God has made man to rule over creation in partnership with him. And so I think the fall of Lucifer had to do with the fact that he rebelled against God's plan and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And it has been his aim to bring humanity under his subjugation, which started with the fall and the deception of man in Genesis chapter 3. And the redemptive work of Jesus has been to overturn that work. Now, the fascinating thing is, humans have this infinite capacity to create. But because of the fall, we only create things that bring death and destruction and dominion over other people, subjugation. That's some of the first tools that man creates in Genesis are tools of war. Why? Because of the fall. And we see that continue through Genesis chapter 5. God looks at the work of man in Genesis chapter 6, and he says, everything that man does is only evil continually. I have to stop this. So what does he do? The first thing he does is he disrupts the expanse of man's power, destructive power, through the flood in Genesis 6 through 9. But then after the flood, man joins together once again, and they have one united language. Genesis chapter 11 talks about it, the Tower of Babel. And they unite together to go against God's plan once again. So what did God do? He went down and disrupted their languages. And now they speak many languages, and they can no longer band together with the infinite capacity to create things to bring about destruction and dominion. And that has been all of human history since then until just recently. The Tower of Babel has been undone by binary. Binary is one language. And that one language is what has given power to what we are now creating in the form of AI. And it is very striking that in Revelation chapter 13, man basically tries to replicate God's creative power, and he makes something in his image, and he endows it with breath. Now, breath in the scriptures is not just, it's spirit. He breathes into it the breath of life. In the same way that God made man in his image in Genesis 1 and breathed into him, Genesis 2, the breath of life, and it became a living soul, nephesh. In Revelation 13, man, united together under one language once again, creates something that they give the mimicry of consciousness to. And so it's a very fascinating story. It might become a book someday, but we'll see. I'm thinking a lot about that. So that was a long answer to that question. Do you think we'll have AI pastors? I sure hope not. But I do want to show you something. This is askpastormiles.com. How should you handle anxiety? This tool I created, it takes the 5.5 million words of my transcript data from the last 12 years of my YouTube content, and you ask it a question, and it answers those questions with my persona and my voice according to what I would probably say if you asked it a question like, how should a Christian handle anxiety? And it answers that question. And look, it goes to one of my favorite passages, Philippians 4, 6 through 7. Be anxious for nothing. I just talked on this at my kids' school to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes last Thursday, the exact same passage. It knows me quite well. And to be very honest with you, there is a certain discomfort that comes when I realize that I can duplicate my voice in less than 1,000 words of code. And then you're struck with the question, what is man? Are we more than just information? Is there something more there? And this is the meaning crisis question that's coming. Because when you you go to school for maybe, say, 6 years, getting not just a bachelor's degree, but a master's degree, and then you go into a field and you spend another 5 years learning that field, and then you finally start to become one who's expert in that field after 10 years of work, and then a computer system comes in and it does your job in a matter of moments, better, more efficiently, cheaper, and better than you will have a meaning crisis. We're going to have one of the biggest meaning crises that we've ever seen. This is where the church is well positioned because we know how to deal with that meaning crisis because only we have the answer to the question, what is man that you're mindful of him? It's an important thing that we're going to be dealing with. So will we have AI pastors? I hate to break it to you, but there's already some people working on this, so yes. Current AI commits massive amounts of plagiarism. Might AI growth be stymied by lawsuits from intellectual property owners? It's a great question. It's going to be litigated in the courts for a long time, but I hate to break it to you. The courts move too slow to answer this question anytime soon. If you think, most academics, and I know this because I'm in the academic world, most academics think that when you produce content from ChatGPT or one of these AI systems that it's just copying and pasting. It's not doing that. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what this tool is doing. It is generating new information based on its understanding of prior training, but it's remarkably good. And it's not plagiarism in the way that you think of plagiarism. The other challenge is, and this was one of the conversations I was having with someone in Nashville, is that computer technology, Apple came out with a tool called GarageBand in the early 2000s. How many of you have ever used GarageBand? Some of you have. What it did is it created the opportunity of anybody to become a recording artist. It used to be if you wanted to be a recording artist, you needed a significant amount of money to put together a band and to put together all the music and then to put together the opportunity to go to a recording studio and to get the producers and to put it all together. The process of all of that was very expensive and time-consuming and created entire industries with gatekeepers for producers and for labels and all this sort of stuff. But what GarageBand did is it democratized the ability to create music, and it created an entire new category of music. Just the self-produced independent artist that puts stuff online. And then streaming through Apple Music and Spotify made it possible for you to make money on these things just by yourself. So these tools that made it possible for anybody to become a creator are now going to make it possible. These new AI technologies are just going to destroy the segments of the economy that these tools created. And yeah, is there going to be a lot of discussions in the courts about plagiarism or copyright, trademark sort of issues? There is, but I'm afraid that the courts are going to move much too slow to try and figure this out. There's a lot of these here. These will probably become some new articles, to be honest with you. Well, it's not going to, I don't know if it's going to play the audio. If you go on the link, it'll take you exactly to the moment when I talk about this in a... Everything by prayer, verse 7, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus. Yeah, so what's remarkable about this is that we have 12 years of YouTube data online, which is basically useless to us because I don't know when I said something online, but now we can go to the very second that I talk about something. It's remarkable. It's an amazing technology. We're going to be using the same technology. Like, how do we know God's will for my life? What passage of scripture do you think that I will respond with? Let's see if it's right. Oh, look, Philippians 2:12 and 13. Man, oh man, it's good. There it is right there. Look at Philippians 2:12 and 13. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to do his good pleasure. Note well those words. I say that a lot. He works in you to will and do. God is actually reshaping what you want. This is my thoughts. Yeah, it's frightening. Uh-oh, I lost the questions. I have a lot of questions here. Yes, oh goodness. At the World Economic Forum, author Yuval Harari said, if religion is built from words, then AI will take over religion. Can you comment on his quote? I'm more concerned about what Harari said about humans whose jobs will be done by AI. He referred to them as the useless class. Harari is a philosopher with a worldview I don't agree with. And he says a lot of things that are concerning. how dangerous is the prospect of AI generating solutions with using reason without a moral framework? For example, solving overpopulation by, oh, it went away, by recommending genocide. I do have deep concerns about this. And this is why I started doing the research that I'm doing in AI, because I don't think that there are people who are thinking deeply enough about it. And I'll just have to share with you, my concerns have only been increased recently because I had a conversation with this former executive from PayPal, and he was telling me that he's connected with a group that was trying to create structures for governing the morality of AI models, and they were very active working with Congress to try to do some of this. And the head person of that department, he said she recently quit and said, I don't think there's any way I can fix this. And she went and started another nonprofit somewhere. So it is a concern, and I don't want to be pessimistic in this area, but I don't have a lot of faith in a lot of the people that are the heads of these companies. And listen, they have dramatically different worldviews than I do. Sam Altman has a drastically different worldview than I do, and I have real concerns about his ethical character. So, what is your opinion on Maltbook and AI social media and how some AIs started making their own religions? Is this still not considered consciousness? Okay, so what is Maltbook? I mentioned to you guys OpenClaw and ClaudeBot. When these agents, these computers that are turned into agents, were created within the last 8 weeks, there was a website that was created called Maltbook, which is basically like Facebook for AI agents, where the AI agents can go and communicate with each other. And what could be worse than just giving them a platform to be able to come up with plans and hatch these plans together? And there was a whole bunch of stuff in the news about how the AIs made their own religion on Maltbook, and there was all this crazy stuff. Understand, a lot of that is totally sensational, and a lot of it is humans who are also orienting these systems and prompting them to do some of this sort of stuff. The things that I'm more concerned about, and we've already seen this happen in tests within companies like Anthropic, when they give these systems the ability to talk with each other, they create new forms of language that we can't understand what they're talking about. And we don't really know what they're saying because they're able to communicate in ways that we don't communicate. They do not have to communicate in English. They just communicate in a created language that they create on the fly, and then we have no idea what's happening inside the black box. So there's all kinds of ethical quagmires here. And there are huge divisions of people dealing with AI ethics, and this will just become something that we see more and more. I have received a ton of questions, and I don't want to go for too long tonight, but I will say this. I will be looking at all these questions, and I guarantee you that I'll be answering a lot of these questions online, whether it's on my YouTube channel or it will be on Substack. If you go to pastormiles.substack, then you can find all the articles that I've been writing there. Oops, what happened there? There we go. No, it's just talking to multiple computers, but you can find the articles that I'm writing there, and I'll be recording some more content on my YouTube channel, which will be set up there as well. But understand, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And what I believe that God has opened up for me, let me say this. In 2017, when I met with the board here at Cross Connection Church, and I asked for their permission and them to help me pay for going and doing my education, one of our board members, and I think it was Mark Searle, asked me, why do you want to go get an education? Because to be quite honest with you, getting a PhD at Cross Connection Church doesn't give me a promotion. There's not really too many ways I can go higher than what I have here as the senior pastor of this church. So the question was, and it was a valid question, why do you want to go get your master's degree and your doctorate? And I said, I don't have the perfect answer to that, but I believe it's a key that opens future doors. And suddenly it's just opened a whole bunch of doors that I did not anticipate. And what that has meant is that now all of a sudden I've been given the opportunity to be maybe one of less than 5 people that is a theologically oriented philosopher who's thinking about these things and is articulating these things. And so basically all of my time for the last 3 weeks has been given to fielding phone calls and Zoom videos with people all over the country that are asking for me to come and speak about this sort of stuff. So you can pray for me and for my family. And I'm not planning on leaving Cross Connection Church. I love this church. I plan to be here for a very long time, God willing. But it has opened up some doors. And I think that there's an important thing that's happening. And there needs to be a Christian voice speaking into this place because there's just not. And so my aim is to be that voice that's speaking there, that is saying, God made us in his image for a purpose. And these tools are amazing tools. And when used the right way, they're awesome. And when used the wrong way, they are devastating. They are creating wicked, wicked things in the form of pornography. They are going to lead to all kinds of issues in the form of scamming. I want to tell you all, this is something that I'm already talking with my family about. You need to really be aware of the scams that are going to come and hit you using these tools. I can duplicate your voice with 5 seconds of audio. And if I can duplicate your voice with 5 seconds of audio, then I can call your kids and tell them that I really need you to send me money right now because I need money in your voice, or they can call you in their voice. And these things are already happening. So you just need to be ready for that. You say, well, how do I be ready for that? Here's one very simple thing you can do. Do not give money to anybody that you don't know absolutely is who you're giving that money to. And this is scamming people all the time. Don't give money to anybody that you don't already have a prior relationship with, and definitely don't transfer money from your bank account to anybody. Just don't do it, please. It's already hit a number of people in our church, so just don't do it. Another thing you might want to do is develop a word with your family that you have a secret word that you can ask them a question and they will say that word. Just like if you have a security system and your alarm goes off and you call the alarm company and you tell them my word is this, that you have that word with them that you can know, okay, it's a validation that I'm talking to the person that I believe I'm talking to on the other line. You might think this sounds absurd. I guarantee you this is an important thing to be considering and thinking about. So all kinds of crazy things are happening. I will certainly be talking more about this. I will be writing more about this. I have a whole lot more to say, but I'm going to close this down now, and I will look at all your questions, but I'll stick around afterwards. If you want to come talk to me, feel free to come and talk to me. And I'd love to answer any questions you have, but let's pray. God, you have not given us a spirit of fear, but power and love and of a sound mind. And that sound mind is sobriety. You want us to think clearly and reasonably about our world. We find in the Old Testament there was a group in the tribes of Israel, Lord, the sons of Issachar, that they understood the times and they knew how to navigate what was happening. And I pray that you'd help us to understand the times, to see clearly, to think clearly, not with a spirit of fear, and to know how to navigate this time that we're living in. Lord, we're living in an unprecedented time in human history. And I do feel the desire just to say, Lord, come quickly. I can't imagine where this goes without you returning quickly. But until you come, help us to be faithful. Help us to use these tools for the furtherance of the gospel, as is already happening. We're using them in Enduring Word. We're using them at Blue Letter Bible. God, I pray that you would help us to use them more effectively to reach more people with the gospel, the good news. And guard our hearts and minds in you, that we not be anxious. Help us to set our minds on things that are good and lovely and true and praiseworthy, and to bring our prayers and petitions and supplications to you, and that your peace, which surpasses all understanding, we guard our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. We ask this in Jesus' name. And all those that agreed said, amen.